Hey, let me tell you a story. It starts late at night in a city where the old hospital had been closing one wing after another. Patients had been moved into a new modern building, while the older halls stood empty waiting for demolition. The walls still carried the smell of disinfectant. The faded nameplates still clung to the doors. One to B, one for C. Reminders of rooms that once held lives but now held only silence. A construction company had been hired to strip the building of copper, wiring, ceiling panels, and anything valuable before the wrecking crews arrived. And that night, four workers stayed behind to finish one last section. The foreman locked the heavy gate behind them, said he would return at dawn, and drove away. The sound of the truck fading into the distance left a silence that was almost physical. The four stood in the dark courtyard with only their portable lamps and a generator. The plan was simple: finish cutting down the remaining ceilings and haul debris into piles, then wait until morning. Nothing unusual, just another job. Yet something about a hospital at night twists routine into unease. They divided the work. Rick and Jason took the upper floor to strip wires from the long corridor. Claire and Mark stayed on the ground floor to pull fixtures from the walls. They agreed to meet in 2 hours at the main entrance, then settle in until sunrise. Each of them knew abandoned places played tricks on the mind, but none wanted to admit it out loud. At first, the night was filled with familiar sounds: hammers, echoing, the grind of saws, each noise bouncing off tiled walls until it felt like dozens of workers filled the halls. Then the rhythm thinned, silence spread between blows, and each pause seemed longer than it should. Claire lifted her head and noticed that one of the doors she had shut earlier now stood slightly open. She thought maybe a draft, but the windows were gone and the air inside was dead. Minutes later, Mark glanced back and froze. The tool cart they had pushed tight against the wall was now sitting in the middle of the hallway, too heavy to roll on its own. He tried to laugh, to say maybe Rick or Jason had come down, but no footsteps had echoed. And in this place, footsteps always echo. Claire muttered that she saw movement, not a shadow, not light, but the distinct cadence of steps at the far end of the corridor. Rick's boots had steel tips. Jason dragged his left foot a little. She knew those sounds, and what she heard was neither of them. Mark shook his head, said it had to be their own echoes. The place was a maze. Sound carried strange, yet Claire's face stayed pale. She knew footsteps when she heard them. Rick came down a few minutes later, sweat on his face, said the stairwell door he had used before was jammed, locked from the other side. He swore it had been open when they started. He tried calling up for Jason, but the sound came back muted, as if something blocked the stairwell. Jason did not answer. Only silence pressed back, heavy and damp. Claire told them they should stop. Forget the work. Wait by the exit until morning. Rick agreed, but when they reached the main gate, the chain that had been looped loose was pulled tight. The padlock snapped shut. None of them had touched it. None of them had the key. Someone had closed it from outside. Mark cursed and rattled the chain. The sound clanged down the empty yard and came back hollow. No answer. No lights in the street beyond the wall. Just their lamps and the black outline of the hospital pressing in around them. Rick suggested breaking a window and climbing out through one of the lower rooms, but when they tried, they found iron bars bolted across, too thick to cut without heavy tools. They returned inside. The hallways now felt tighter. The shadows of their lamps dragged long along the walls. Claire swore again she heard movement, softer this time, like someone pacing slowly just beyond the reach of their light. Mark snapped at her to stop, said nerves were getting the best of them, but then all for her to sound together. The unmistakable slam of a door closing somewhere upstairs. A single sharp echo that froze their blood. Rick whispered Jason's name, but no reply came. Only the squeal of old hinges far above. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. They stood close together in the empty corridor, realizing they were no longer sure how many people were actually in the building with them. They stood in silence, their lamps trembling slightly in their hands, the echo of that slammed door still hanging in the air. Rick wanted to run upstairs and find Jason, but Claire grabbed his arm and told him to wait. Her voice low, sharp, not out of fear, but control. She said if Jason was fine, he would have answered by now. If he was not, then charging blindly into the dark was not going to help. Mark suggested they stick together, sweep one hallway at a time. The hospital was a maze and panic would only split them apart. They moved slowly, every footstep dragging against the grit on the floor. Each door they passed stood half open, as if waiting for someone to step inside. The smell of dust mixed with the faint sting of bleach, a reminder that these walls once held order, now only decay. When they reached the stairwell again, Rick forced the door with his shoulder. The frame groaned, but held. Something solid pressed against it from the other side. Not debris, not a jammed lock. It felt deliberate, like someone had wedged it shut. Claire shone her lamp through the narrow crack and saw nothing but darkness. Yet she was sure something was there. Listening, suddenly a noise rolled down from the upper floor. Not a slam this time, but a dragging sound. Heavy, slow, like a weight pulled across tiles. They froze, each of them hearing it clearly. Mark called Jason's name, his voice trembling. No reply, only the drag continuing, pausing, then starting again. Rick clenched his fists, muttering that it had to be a prank. Maybe some junkie had slipped in through a broken window. But even he did not believe it fully. They backed away from the stairwell and returned to the main corridor, their lamps cutting tunnels through the dark. Then they noticed something written on the wall, lines scratched into the paint. Not graffiti, but words, crude and hurried. Get out. The letters uneven as if carved with a piece of metal. None of them remembered seeing it earlier, the dust around it still fresh. Claire whispered that someone was trying to scare them, that maybe they were never alone in this place. Mark shook his head, said whoever it was had locked the gate and blocked the stairwell, which meant planning, not chance. They argued in hushed voices until a sudden scream cut through from above, short, strangled, unmistakably Jason, and then silence. Rick bolted toward the stairwell, smashing the door again. This time the pressure gave way and he stumbled inside. The others followed. The upper hall stretched long and narrow, lamps shaking as they scanned side rooms, gurneys left overturned, plaster hanging from the ceiling. At the far end Jason's helmet lay on the ground, the strap torn, no sign of him, only a smear across the dust leading into a side room. They entered slowly, the smell of rust and damp rising strong. The room was empty except for wires dangling from the ceiling and broken cabinets, but in the corner lay Jason's tool bag, ripped open, his gloves tossed aside. No body, no movement, just the sense of a struggle that had already ended. Claire whispered that they needed to get out now. No more searching, no more waiting for dawn. Someone was hunting them. Mark tried the nearest window, but the bars held tight. He slammed his crowbar against them until sparks flew, but nothing bent. Rick kept calling Jason's name until his voice cracked. Finally Claire shouted at both of them to stop, said the more noise they made the easier it was for whoever was inside with them. That sobered them. They listened, and in the stillness they heard it again. Slow steps echoing from somewhere below. Steady, calm, as if the person knew exactly where they were. They retreated down the hall, hearts pounding, the generator buzz from outside flickering weakly through the building. Then suddenly the lights they had rigged on extension cords went out, one after another, until only their handheld lamps remained. Mark cursed, said someone had killed the generator. Claire held her lamp tight, said they were being funneled, pushed like rats through a maze. They moved quickly now, trying every door, every hallway, but found each exit blocked. Chains across double doors, heavy cabinets dragged against frames. It was too precise to be chance. Rick began to lose control, shouting, kicking walls, demanding whoever was there show themselves. And from somewhere deep in the building came an answer. Not words, just the sound of keys rattling. Deliberate, mocking, Claire forced them forward, said they had to find another way to the roof. Maybe break through to the adjoining wing. The corridors twisted, each turn bringing them back to familiar ground, until they realized they were moving in circles. Doors that should have led to storage now opened into patient rooms. The layout wrong, rearranged, but they knew it was the building, not their minds. Someone had been preparing this place. When they finally reached the service elevator shaft, they found the doors jammed open, the cab gone, only a black drop into nothingness. Jason's flashlight lay on the edge, cracked and useless. Mark leaned forward and swore he heard breathing from the shaft, but Claire yanked him back before he could look, her hand shaking but her voice steady. Not curiosity, survival. The night stretched thin, each minute longer than the last. They tried to hold one room together, pushing a cabinet against the door, their lamps flickering. Rick whispering that maybe Jason was already gone, that maybe they were next. Claire pressed her back to the wall and stared at the door, saying if someone wanted them dead, they would already be dead, that whoever it was wanted them to wait, to break slowly. Hours crawled by, their nerves unraveling. Then, just before dawn, the sound of the main gate outside clanged, the foreman returning, his truck engine rumbling. Claire screamed through the barred window, but before the man could even step down from his cab, a figure moved across the yard, tall, hood pulled low, and the foreman froze, then turned and drove off, the gate never opening. The three of them never saw Jason again, and when the demolition crews arrived a week later, they swore the building was empty. No tools, no helmets, no bodies, only dust and silence. The company called it an accident, workers walking off the job. Nothing to investigate, but those who knew the story said that whoever sealed those doors still has keys, still walks the halls at night, waiting for someone else to be locked inside. So if you ever pass an abandoned hospital and think it might be fun to look inside, remember the crew that went in and never all came out. Remember the padlock that closed on its own and the doors that would not open. And if you hear footsteps where no one should be, do not stay. Do not search. Just leave, because not every building waits empty. Some are already claimed. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe. There are more tales waiting, and some of them are closer than you think.